Instead, a lot of people like me could be out there who've halfway stopped learning a language due to other commitments, and so maybe this video could help push you back on the path. Hey folks, welcome back. Today we're going to try and answer whether we can actually learn French or even another foreign language like Korean, Japanese or even Chinese without needing a teacher, or more essentially without having to go to school and learn it. Alright, let's assume you're just like me. You grew up with a background in English, and so you start off as a baby talking to your parents, starting with nonsense and gibberish, but as you grow up with all your relatives around you and your parents, and then eventually you go to school where all the time you get different words thrown at you. They don't expect you to understand, but all the same your brain is taking it in. Remember, we know nothing at this point. It's not like in school when we're trying to learn French, because we already know English and we're just trying to apply the similar principles to a new language. But when we're babies, we know nothing. And so for us to learn English without knowing anything before that, that's kind of extraordinary, don't you think? So as I'm trying to make clear, there's a bit of a pattern here. With each and every new bit of content that we immerse ourselves in, we get better. We start from the Goo Goo Gagas, and then we go to the Harry Potters, and then the Game of Thrones, and then Dan Brown, and whatever we watch these days. And for more proof that we do this, maybe you might remember from your school days that you used to have a new classmate who came from abroad. And so he would have a funny little accent when he tried to speak to you all. And on the same note, maybe you yourself would have noticed that when speaking to a foreigner, an accent would naturally come out and try to match the tone of the foreigners. That shows us a real supercomputer is at work when the brain is immersing itself in all the knowledge that it gains from its surroundings. And that's the concept we're trying to build upon. Immersion in the hopes of knowledge. Trusting our brain will piece it together for us without having to rely on a teacher and specific grammar rules to get us by. I myself was introduced to this concept by the channel What I've Learned, where he gives a very compelling case, which does in fact make a lot of sense when we think about it. For gold standard examples of this happening, you can check out channels that he interviews, specifically Matt from Japan and Steve Kaufman. These guys of course aren't the norm, and I don't want you to think otherwise either. So a better place to start to try and convince you that all you need to learn a language is input is this video by What I've Learned. I think the name of the video is Language Learning is All About Input. Anyway, the thumbnail should be over here, and there'll be a link in the description. So definitely check it out if you aren't too convinced about the theory or would like to learn for yourself. Then moving on to the real point of the video, my journey with French, or rather the journey I want to continue. So my journey with French was pretty good. It started halfway in my grade 7s in school, and I did my Cambridge O-levels in French, where I learned a lot at the time from my teacher, Madame Udeshika. I also went on to learn a little bit more, studying for the B1 exam, but didn't go quite that far and stopped halfway. And now funnily enough, I'm trying to start it back again. And this time I'm inspired to take a different approach, perhaps with not so much teaching, but rather learning by myself through the various resources we find on the internet. So to clarify, I'm definitely not a beginner. If you take the CEFR framework, which is how you grade a person in their terms of fluency in a language, which starts from A1, A2, B1, B2, C1 and C2, which is a native speaker's standard, I would probably fall into the B1 category. So right in the middle, I'd say. So I think this video won't convince a lot of absolute beginners to start learning a language. Besides, all you need to do is to take a look at a few clips of native speakers to know just how complicated a language can get.
Fais la tienne ?
Vas-y.
Allez. Donc, quand on est arrivé, j'ai dit à Lou qu'elle pouvait choisir sa chambre, tout simplement parce que d'habitude, moi je prends toujours la plus grande vu qu'il y a mon copain qui reste avec moi. Cette fois-ci, comme on a deux grandes chambres, je lui ai dit tu prends celle que tu veux.
Instead, a lot of people like me could be out there who've halfway stopped learning a language due to other commitments, and so maybe this video could help push you back on the path. But idealistically, Even being a beginner shouldn't be able to stop us now, because just take a look around us. The internet is blooming. It's so much easier. Just think about life 20 years ago. If you wanted to learn a language, maybe you could find some books from a bookstore, or in the best case, you could take a trip to France and try to learn France by immersing yourself with the locals over there. But taking a look at us now, we have so much resources from the internet. TV shows, YouTube, many messaging apps where you can talk with real French natives. But that brings us to the why we should undertake such a challenge, especially when we could just disregard such a challenge. Because to think of immersing ourselves in an unknown language, taking up precious time when we don't understand 60% of what's being said. So I can tell you a bit more about why I wanted to start learning French again. It mainly started because of the Sri Lankan situation, things not looking so good, and really looking for more options with this country. And so perhaps the biggest advantage one could have is learning a different language. So for me, hopefully it would open up chances to go abroad. And the Olympics are being held in France in 2024, so maybe more options there. And then the free education system in most of the European countries like France and Germany, so perhaps lower cost education at a university. And if already you hadn't found enough reason, another huge advantage from learning from this method could be that if you follow the traditional method of using grammar and perhaps translating the sentences in your head to see if it sounds right after long hours of studying the grammar and practicing it, you would know that in a real conversation it would be really difficult, because imagine taking the time in your head to translate what you want to say to a native speaker. They're not just going to wait for you to think of what to say. Rather, when we speak like I am speaking now in English, the words just come to my mouth, as it should in a normal day-to-day conversation. But if you try to go through the school only route, that is learning grammar without spending too much time in immersion or learning from different contexts, from different sources of the language, that way the words aren't going to come as fluently to our mouth, making us pretty much useless in a conversation. However, I should mention I had a pretty good experience with school myself, because when I was learning for my O levels, our teacher was quite smart and she gave us plenty of context to learn from. But I feel like that wouldn't be the case for all the students out there. So if you're listening, do give this method a try. I'm sure it'll help you at least a little bit. So on the subject of how to immerse, what I can do right now is give you a lot of examples of what I used in the past 2 to 3 weeks to immerse myself in French content. I would break it down into about 5 subcategories, although there's definitely more different types of content out there. These 5 mediums would be TV shows, books, YouTube videos, Discord channels, and also songs. You could also take a look at some podcasts and even messenger apps like italki, where you can communicate by video call with French natives and in exchange for perhaps helping them out with a language like English. Alright, we'll get into the specifics. So being aliens to the French language, we of course wouldn't know that many TV shows to begin with. So as a beginner and perhaps as an anime enthusiast, I would recommend looking up for a French dub of an anime show. For example, in my case, I looked up Demon Slayer, or as the French call it, Les Profondeurs des Démons. The legal way would be to search for a French dub on Crunchyroll, but some of us don't have a Crunchyroll subscription. So instead, there was this site that I might have used called nya.si. So this is a really good site for anime related stuff, so I hope you use it well. It is a torrent site. And then ideally as beginners, we won't be able to start with adult shows, and instead some shows I found interesting was a show called Lou. Another show was also Sally Bollywood. Both of these shows are about the adventures of young girls, and so perhaps it might not appeal to everyone, and I myself have only watched 1 episode of them, but they look pretty interesting so far. So it could be a good place to start with authentic French content, because as you progress in your journey, you will find out that perhaps dubbed content, which is not original French content, can be a bit lacking because you're not experiencing it how it was meant to be experienced. And in fact, all the shows I mentioned, Lou, Sally Bollywood, are all on YouTube, so you don't have to look far for them. It's very easy to access them, and hopefully that will make it a lot easier for you to experiment before going too far into this journey. The second medium would be Discord channels. This won't be typical for everyone, but for me, who has to spend a lot of time by myself at home, finding a community was one of the better decisions I could have made. And so I can recommend two Discord servers. One is the Refold community, which is co-founded by the guy I named earlier, Matt from Japan. And so it's an attempt to get a lot of people who are interested in this very same concept together. And so it's a very helpful community, and I actually learned a lot from the recommendations that the community gave. It's probably one of the best Discord servers out there if you're interested, if you want to keep motivation and perhaps take on this journey for a long time. To give you a small example, one of the channels that was recommended was a guy named Grégoire Dossier, who is in fact a law student in France and is not extremely popular either, so it would have taken me a good long time to find that channel. But instead, with such a helpful community, I was able to find it straight away and in fact get some ideas of what I could do if I could learn French and I have a bit of legal education. The other Discord server I would recommend is a server called J29. And I haven't interacted a lot on it, but in fact almost everyone else on that server were French natives. I actually got an insight into how natives would react, including a lot of French slang, which led me to discovering Verlan, which I'll leave you to discover on your own, which is in fact a type of French slang that only natives would use and therefore help you to get an organic sense of what the culture is about and how people actually talk instead of what goes on in TV shows. So the third medium would be books. I myself do not have a lot of experience with this. The only story I can tell you is that I tried to read a children's book in French, but the first story I picked up, it was about some talking fingers, and there was a talking needle, and it was really very bizarre, and I couldn't get very far with it. In fact, it was quite scary. And while I definitely hope to give books a shot, perhaps right now would not be the best time, yet there's this great book recommendation for French stories by Ollie Richards, which I hope to read one day once I save up the money for it. And finally, the best gift anyone could give for language learning, YouTube. There's so many videos out there. You could learn a lot from a host of different topics. You will be watching French audio and hopefully with French subtitles. Probably the best place to start, and where I started, was actually with channels like French Mornings with Elisa, and where Elisa makes very nice vlogs and has a pleasing accent and gives interesting takes on French culture. Another channel would be Inner French, which takes a bit of a more analytical take on the language but does it very well, and I would highly recommend it. So once you check out those channels and perhaps decide to take it a bit more seriously, a really good step to get you started would be to create a new YouTube account where you could behave as if a French person was trying to open a new YouTube account. And so once you open that YouTube account, try to only interact with videos that are in French. So for example, you could search up biology just as a French person would. Whenever you get recommendations, say in English or perhaps Korean, you can click and make sure that YouTube tries not to show similar content to you and that you only want YouTube content by clicking don't recommend this channel again. As for examples, in the 2 to 3 weeks that I've been using YouTube, I've come across quite a few interesting channels. There's a young lady who does home renovating as the basis for the channel. Then there's a guy who's into fitness who does very fun vlogs such as a trip to the zoo with exotic creatures. And there's Alice Chance, who's pretty much going on the same journey as us. In fact, passed her C1 exams, although she did learn from her teacher, so perhaps it's not exactly the same. And lastly, a rather different pick would be Bling, where one video that particularly interested me was The Island of Millionaires, which was probably something I wouldn't have watched if it was recommended in English. But watching it really gave me a lot of ideas and in fact quite some inspiration as to what I could do myself. And lastly, the fifth medium, songs. Now, a lot of us love songs, and so songs are a great way to learn. In fact, one channel, French Mornings with Elisa, in fact, recommends songs because we can learn the lyrics and in doing so, be able to repeat the lyrics to ourselves to help us learn vocabulary a lot more easier. So in the few days that I've been learning French this way, I came across Angèle and Romeo Elvis. Two singers who impressed me a lot and who I hope to be watching more of. I'll leave you to make your own impressions on them, but I'll link some videos down below if you're interested. You can check out this song by Angel that I think was released a few days ago called Vivre Libre. Check it out if you're just looking for a fun little pop song in French. That has me come to the end of my list of recommendations. There's a whole bunch of content that you could be interacting with if you are interested. I gave you a lot of recommendations, but the beauty of it is that you can easily disregard all of it, because the power of language gives you the power to choose what you want to watch. So if there's anything to be taken from this video, it's about finding your why you would want to learn a language and give up your time in order to learn a lot about a different culture and perhaps communicate with a different set of people around the world. So for my fellow learners out there like weebs and K-pop stans who already have a good reason to learn more about the language and have a strong why, I'd say they are the more likely to pursue this journey because they have a strong reason to continue. I've found this journey a lot of fun so far, and I hope to give you an update maybe 6 months in, and I hope that I pushed some of you to perhaps take an adventurous step. Thank you for watching today's video, and remember, there's no rules to this. It's just a very good process to know about, and hopefully it will give you a lot more freedom. If you did enjoy the video and perhaps watched up to this point, do consider subscribing. I hope to make more videos like this. And to leave you all, if some of you are still curious, you could check out this video to see a successful story that really put this process to practice with this one of Matt in Japan. That's all for today. See you next time. Thank you.